Hello my lovely patrons, and I'm so happy to share with you this video tutorial reward for the month of May 2018. It's going to be an oil painting walkthrough tutorial of this painting titled Breathe. And as usual, I will be listing all of the art supplies I used for this video in the description below, along with links to purchase them. I had prepared this piece for my gesso board panel by printing out the concept sketch that I had scanned and then using graphite paper to transfer the large concept sketch onto the panel. That way, when I started my underpainting, I already had a rough outline of where everything should go and how the composition should look. It made the process a lot speedier. Because I wanted to focus on cool muted tones, I simply used black and white for my underpainting, and I mixed a lot of white with a tiny bit of black to give myself a wide range of grays to use. And for this underpainting, I actually decided to make it a little bit more detailed, especially around the face, just to give myself a head start on the values of the whole piece. And then here I'm going in with a slightly darker gray, still not fully black, to just further refine the shadows and make the darkest parts pop. And one thing I do regret though, and this is something you guys should watch out for, is I did make the underpainting a little bit too dark, and I found myself having to really work around that and mitigate that when I was working on the subsequent layers to help lighten up the skin. And because I had focused so much on making the skin very detailed, and I just couldn't wait to jump into actually adding color to the piece, the face was basically a lot darker than the rest of the body because the face had the most layers of gray as the underpainting. So next time I'll definitely keep things consistent and not dwell too much on one area, especially when it's the underpainting part, because it does end up getting covered and I had to, like I said, correct a lot of the mistakes I had made. But overall, for this piece, I kept the color palette very simple, and I primarily used blues. So it was Prussian blue plus a mixture of black and white. I used Mars black and titanium white. And here I'm just starting to add the red highlights with a pop of cadmium red medium and a little bit of radiant magenta, which is a beautiful pastel pink made by Gamblin Oils. And for the skin tones, I actually used my go-to combination, which is cadmium red medium plus sap green. That creates a beautiful, neutral, warm skin color. And by adding either more red or more green, you can adjust the coolness or the warmth of the skin tone. But because I wanted to keep this piece very muted and desaturated, I simply mixed black and white with my cadmium red plus sap green mixture so that it wasn't as warm and wasn't as bright. And for the eyes, I gave her little cute little brown eyes, and I basically used the same skin tone mixture with a touch of transparent earth orange, also from Gamblin. It's a really beautiful earthy orange, just to give the eyes a little bit more pop. And throughout the piece, whenever I was working on shadows, I made sure to incorporate Prussian blue into the shadows because I felt that it really made the piece more cohesive and made her skin feel more integrated with the hair, which has a lot of the Prussian blue. And also one thing, I knew that it was going to feature a black, dark background, very simple, and also the mermaid would have dark black hair. So one thing I really tried to avoid was overwhelming the piece with too much black. As you can see here, I went in with my lighter blues just to give it some fogginess and not make the piece seem too dark, because while I did want it to stay simple and elegant, I also wanted to make sure there was enough dimension and texture to keep the piece interesting. So there's a little cutoff here where the water is going to basically influence how her skin looks underneath the water. And I simply just mixed my regular skin tone colors with a bit more blue. And the blues I went to were Prussian blue and turquoise light. Turquoise light is from Blick. It's a Blick brand, and it's a beautiful, almost daytime ocean blue. And I felt like Prussian blue was a beautiful nighttime ocean blue. So the two together were the primary blues of this piece. And here I'm going in, adjusting the face. Like I mentioned before, I had to really work hard to make sure it was bright enough, given that the underpainting was so dark. The blush areas I kept very consistent with the rose petals. On her face, the blush areas, I used cadmium red medium, radiant magenta, and a touch of quinacridone opera to give it like that bright magenta pop. And in the eyeballs, I also added a slight ring of turquoise light around her irises, just to give the eye whites some more interesting dimension, because I found that transitioning from just the brown or the black to the eye whites made her eyes a little bit grayed out, and I wanted to add like a pop of color just to show how the light would bounce off of her eyes from her environment. And a trick with painting highlights on the face for dark pieces such as this, I didn't use pure white to paint the highlights. I made sure to make the white a little bit darker by toning it down with blues and a little bit of black, so that it didn't stand out too much, because a pure white was just almost a little bit too much to handle. It just stood out so much from how dark the rest of the piece was and made it look not very well integrated. And as you can see here, I'm basically smoothing out the skin tone. From my second and third layers of the skin, I pretty much used the exact same colors that I did in the first layer. I don't really aim to tweak the skin tone. I more so just want to smooth it out and make it look more rich and well rendered. The rose I painted very slowly and carefully because I didn't want to mess it up, given that they do have a very sharp outline and they are the focal point of the piece. I went in with my darker reds first. I simply mixed cadmium red medium with a little bit of Prussian blue and black, and then I went in with my midtones and then finally the highlights. And of course, you can always go back and tweak more. So if you find that there needs to be a bit more shadow in certain areas, it's always okay to go back and add more. But generally with the roses, I like to start dark, medium, and then light. And same with the skin tone. Here I'm going back and adding in darker shadows because I wanted to even out how the body looks compared to the face. Since the face started off so dark, I had to make the face lighter and then make the body darker to make sure the end result was more well balanced. And here I'm actually changing my concept. I'm making like a cutout so that you can see the water line, so you get a sense of almost what's above and what's below and how they're separated by almost like an underwater camera that's split halfway. Initially in my concept sketch and when I started this piece, I wanted the rose petals to fall into the water and kind of fill up the entire canvas, but then I got the idea for the split level look and I really like how it turned out. And I like that you get a closer look at the gills that she has underneath the water. With the hair, I used actually a mixture of gray, Prussian blue, and touches of pink because there's hints of pink on her face and a little bit of red on the roses, of course. So I wanted to tie that into the hair. And for the highlights, I mainly focused on blues, but for some of the midtones, I added touches of red and quinacridone opera. And of course, always going back to add a few loose strands just to show how organic and lifelike the hair is. I always recommend going back and making your girl's hair a little bit messy. That's how you make it feel more real. If the hair is too perfect, it doesn't look like flowy, silky strands. It ends up looking like a block or something too perfect, like a doll. So if you want your characters to look really organic and natural and real, I always suggest adding in a little bit of imperfection to them, whether it's loose hair strands or in some case freckles and moles. Yeah, in my case, since she's a mermaid, I played a lot with the loose hair strands and making sure that the strands kind of stuck close to her skin or close to her body because her hair would be wet. And with the scales, I basically went in with a slightly lighter color than whatever's on her skin. And in this case, I used a lot of turquoise light mixed with black and white. And I blend the scales out a little bit with a dry brush, and then I go in and add little highlights. Same with the water. I use similar highlight techniques as the scales and the face, not using pure white, but a toned down white. And the rose petals, I also painted very carefully because I didn't want the red to have to be covered for later, because if you make a mistake and it's, the color is way too different, it takes so many layers to cover it up. So I just wanted to really make sure I was careful. And the final scales on the arm, I kept really simple and subtle so that they didn't pop out too much, but rather gave you a glimpse of the texture. And that about wraps up this photo tutorial video. Thank you all so much for selecting this in this month's poll. I'm so glad that you guys have been finding these videos useful, and I can't wait to make more of these for you in the coming months. I'm so grateful to have your support and have awesome patrons such as yourselves, and I can't wait to see you next month. Bye!